Hello everyone, welcome to Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel, and today is part 3 of our deep dive into the Bermuda Triangle. So, I think I got the timing down for OBS. Today we're doing chapter 3, which is titled The Sea of Lost Ships. Oh yes, this one's gonna be good. Alright, so I'm going to give everyone a few minutes. I see that Denise is here. Good to see you, Denise. And welcome everyone else joining in as I read along. Alright, so I'm going to just start. And again, we're on chapter 3. In the previous shows, we did chapter 1 and chapter 2. We started covering the disappearing planes. We went from 1945 to 1973. And again, this book was published in 1974. So it will be lacking some updated material. But this, I think, is a good resource for us to use just to begin to understand what this phenomenon's all about. But anyways, we are starting on chapter 3, The Sea of Lost Ships. Alright, so we're just going to jump right in and get started. Ship disappearances within the triangle have been principally covered within the region of the western Atlantic Ocean called the Sargasso Sea, a so-called largely immobile sea named after the seaweed sargassum. If anything were needed to intensify the mystery of the triangle, such an element is provided by the Sargasso Sea, itself a mystery ever since the first Spanish and Portuguese seamen encountered it 500 years ago. And if we include what now seem to have been probable penetrations and crossings of it by Phoenician and Carthaginian ocean-going sailors, it has been an observed mystery for thousands of years. The Sargasso Sea is a huge area of the western North Atlantic characterized by the presence of a kind of floating seaweed sargassum, which, lazily floating either separately or in large masses, marks the boundaries of this sea within an ocean. When Columbus on his first voyage observed so much seaweed, he mistakenly deduced that land was near and was greatly encouraged by it, a sentiment not wholeheartedly shared by his crew. The Seaweed Sea is bounded by the north and by the Gulf Stream as it moves first northeast and then east on the west and south by returning Gulf Stream and the North Equator Current. Although somewhat amorphous, it extends from about 37 degrees north latitude to about 27 degrees south latitude and from 75 degrees west to 40 degrees west. Under the deep waters of the Sargasso Sea lie the Hatteras and Nares abyssal plains, the precipitous Bermuda Rise, numerous mysterious accounts, underwater mountains rising toward the surface but terminating in flat tops as if they had once been islands, and at its eastern limits, part of the North Atlantic Ridge, a tremendous north-south underwater mountain chain in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, whose highest crests break through the surface of the sea to form the Azores Islands. In other words, a stagnant sea almost devoid of currents, except on its borders, extends from about 200 miles north of the Greater Antilles up the Florida and Atlantic coasts at a general distance of about 200 miles from land to the vicinity of Cape Hatteras, and then out in the Atlantic in the direction of the Iberian Peninsula and Africa up to the North Atlantic Ridge and back again to the Americas. The Sargasso Sea is characterized not only by its omnipresent seaweed, but by its deadly calms, a fact that many have started the picturesque but unnerving legend of Sea of Lost Ships, the Graveyard of Lost Ships, and the Sea of Fear. This sailor's legend told of a great Atlantic surface graveyard containing ships from all the ages of seafaring man, caught and immobilized in the fields of seaweed, although decaying but still manned by skeleton crews, or rather crews of skeletons, compromised of the unfortunates who could not escape and shared the doom of their ships. In this area of death were to be found tramp streamers, yachts, whalers, clippers, packets, brigantines, pirate vessels, and, to make the story better, Spanish treasure galleons. In enthusiastic retelling of these stories, the tellers included other ships that should certainly have rotted away and disappeared by the time of the telling, such as the dragon ships of the Vikings with skeletons still at their oars, Arab sailing galleys, Roman triremes with their great banks of oars, Phoenician trading ships with silver anchors, and even the great ships of lost Atlantis, their bows covered with fitted gold plate, all doomed to rot for centuries in a motionless sea. The first legends about the Sargasso Sea may stem from the Phoenicians and Carthaginians, who possibly crossed it thousands of years ago and made landfalls in the Americas, as indicated by the many Phoenician stone inscriptions in Brazil and some in the United States. Caches of Phoenician coins found first in the Azores, Carthaginian coins later found in Venezuela and the southeast coast of the United States, as well as ancient pictorial representations of what appear to be Semitic visitors in Mexico. The following report from the Carthaginian Admiral Himilco, made in 500 BC, strikes a familiar if somewhat sensational chord in reference to the seaweed fields and lack of winds in the Sargasso Sea. No breeze drives the ship, so dead is the sluggish wind of this idle sea. There is much seaweed among the waves, it holds back the ship like bushes. The sea has no great depth, the surface of the earth is barely covered by a little water. The monsters of the sea move continuously to and fro, and fierce monsters swim among the sluggish and slowly creeping ships. Admiral Hamilco may be pardoned a certain and understandable exaggeration across the vault of time, and besides the Phoenico-Carthaginian ocean travelers were most anxious to discourage other travelers of the time from sailing past the Pillars of Hercules, or Gibraltar, at the entrance to the Mediterranean into the ocean sea beyond. This was primarily to keep to themselves the profitable trade they had with cultures of the Atlantic coasts of Europe and Africa, and perhaps even farther afield. The Carthaginians even had a mandatory death sentence for their sea captains who betrayed their routes or even their presence on the Atlantic, a factor which explains the Carthaginian penchant for sinking all strange ships near or past Gibraltar, or when not strong enough to do so, to escape notice, scuttling their own craft if necessary. Other ancient writers have embroidered on these early reports and have commented on the shoals and shallows in the Atlantic left by the subsidence of the lost continent of Atlantis, as well as the seaweed which enmeshed the oars and stopped the galleys. Like most legends of the Sea of Lost Ships, could have some basis in reality, although embroidered with fantasy and dreams. The Australian Alan Villiers, a lifelong sailor who, when crossing the Sargasso Sea on a sailing ship, actually observed an abandoned ship among the seaweed, points out that, and this is from Wild Ocean, 1957, if a ship were becalmed long enough to use up her stores, she would, quote, eventually grow grass and barnacles until she became virtually unable to sail, end quote. And that tropical borer worms would bore into the sides of the vessel until, quote, a rotted and putrid mess manned by skeletons slipped below the heated surface of the calm sea, end quote. Among the many derelicts that have been sighted in the Sargasso Sea within modern times are some that, although not enmeshed in seaweed, have been becalmed and abandoned through lack of wind. Even the name of the horse latitudes, which traverse the Sargasso Sea, is an indication of the stagnant calm, for when the Spanish galleons were becalmed and the drinking water began to run low, the Spaniards were reluctantly forced to kill and jettison their war horses in order to conserve water. Modern motor ships no longer run the risk of being becalmed, a fact that makes the numerous ship disappearances there even more mysterious. Of course, all ship losses are mysterious, inasmuch as relatively few captains set out to lose their ships. When the fate of a ship is established or even assumed, the mystery ceases. This has not been the case with the many ships that have disappeared in the Sargasso Sea. In the early recorded days of disappearances in the Sargasso Sea and its bordering Gulf Stream area, many losses were set down to weather or pirates. Although Spanish records were surprisingly well kept, no doubt because of the value of the cargoes borne by the galleons of the yearly treasure fleets to Spain. These ships, coming from Mexico, Panama, and what is now Colombia, made a rendezvous at Havana and sailed up the Keys and the Florida Strait, where many of them foundered in hurricanes and deposited their treasures on the sea bottom for the benefit of subsequent generations of divers. Others were sunk without trace by privateers or ordinary pirates. Long after piracy at sea ceased to be a profitable way of life, however, Ships continued to disappear in this area even when the weather was good, and as would be increasingly common in their later years, without depositing any wreckage or bodies along the shores and islands of the western Atlantic. Many of these recorded disappearances concern ships of the United States and other navies, starting with the USS Insurgent in August 1800 with 340 men on board, up to the disaster from unknown causes which overtook the submarine Scorpion with a crew of 99 in May 1968. The Scorpion, however, was not a disappearance, since it was finally located at a depth of 2 miles underwater at about 460 miles southeast of the Azores. Other unexplained disappearances of naval craft in this area have included the following. So before I continue, we do have a lithograph. So I am going to show that on camera now, as well as read the little description in here. It says, area occupied by the Sargasso Sea in the western North Atlantic. Arrows indicate direction of the Gulf Stream and the North Equatorial Current, which form the approximate boundaries of the seaweed-bearing and seemingly stagnant sea within the ocean, characterized by deadly calm. Depth on the chart is shown by the progressively darker areas, except for small islands, such as Bermuda and the Azores, shown in solid black. Raised areas, especially between 30 and 40 degrees north latitude, show the mysterious sea mounts, underwater mountains with flat tops, suggesting that they were once islands. The shallow areas around the Azores and the Bahamas are also an indication of these islands having been much greater size before the melting of the last glaciation raised the water level of the oceans. So it is showing the depth. It's not a topographical map in any sense, but you could see Florida there. I thought that was worth showing. So everything that we're coming across here in terms of photographs, I will continue to show like this. Okay. Time to continue here. Other unexplained disappearances of naval craft in this area have included the following. The USS Pickering disappeared on August 20th, 1800, with a crew of 90 en route to Guadeloupe in the West Indies from Newcastle, Delaware. The USS Wasp, October 9th, 1814, sailing in the Caribbean with a crew of 140. The USS Wildcat, October 28th, 1824, en route from Cuba to Thompson's Island with a crew of 14. HMS Atlanta, January 1880, en route from Bermuda to England with total complement of 290, mostly naval cadets aboard for training. The disappearance of the Atlanta was the occasion for a long sea search by the British Navy. 6 ships from the Channel Fleet were detailed to advance in a line separated one from another by several miles over the area in which the Atlanta was presumed lost. This wide search was to be repeated many times in the future when planes would fly in massive search patterns over the area, almost wingtip to wingtip, The search for the Atlanta continued until early May without success. USS Cyclops, March 4th, 1918. En route from Barbados to Norfolk, Virginia, with 309 naval personnel aboard. Among the disappearances suffered by the Navy, the Cyclops is the best known and also the most unusual, considering land, sea, and ship-to-ship communications at the time of World War I, as well as because of additional items of coincidence. Since the First World War was still raging, it was first thought that the Cyclops, a collier or coal supply ship, and a sister ship to the USS Langley, which was later converted to a U.S. aircraft carrier, had either struck a mine, encountered a German submarine or surface raider, or suffered a mutiny arising from the despotic actions of its, quote, mutiny on the bounty, end quote, type captain. It was also assumed by many that the Cyclops had simply been betrayed to the enemy by its German-born captain, who had changed his last name from the German Weichmann to the less Teutonic-sounding Worley. In effect, evidence was indicated for some or all of these possibilities, especially since the Cyclops, on leaving the port in Barbados, had abruptly turned south instead of north to its announced destination, and then just as abruptly disappeared. But eventual examination of German naval records indicated that there were no German submarines or mines in the area at the time. However, a British ship, also incredibly named the Cyclops, had been sunk by U-boats in the North Atlantic. The USS Cyclops at the time of its disappearance was carrying a cargo of manganese ore, and sometime after the war, German agents in South America took credit, a phenomenon not unknown in intelligence circles when an operation is successful, for having placed time bombs in the cargo. At all events, the case of the Cyclops possesses all the ingredients for a scenario of mystery and adventure. A German captain of a U.S. Navy vessel who may have been mentally deranged since he habitually walked the bridge dressed in long underwear and a derby hat. Passengers including the former U.S. Consul General to Brazil, plus 3 naval seamen prisoners under indictment for murder, and a couple of AWOL Marines. A theory for the disappearance of the Cyclops, which may have furnished an idea for the story of a 1973 movie, The Poseidon Adventure, was advanced by U.S. Vice Admiral M.S. Tisdall, who published his opinion based on the vessel's tendency to roll in an article titled, quote, "Did the Cyclops turn turtle?" End quote. In the movie, the passenger ship turns turtle as a result of poor loading and excessive speed when it is struck by a tidal wave, but does not sink. As far as can be ascertained, the Cyclops was not in a hurricane, but, of course, could have been struck by a sudden sea wave, turned over and gone straight to the bottom, pulling down escaping crew members and equipment in her vortex. But the only sure thing known about the Cyclops is that it vanished, and have so many other ships, large and small, within the Bermuda Triangle. In the words of a Navy fact sheet on the USS Cyclops, since her departure from Barbados, March 4th, 1918, there has been no trace of the vessel. The disappearance of the ship has been one of the most baffling mysteries in the annals of the Navy. All attempts to locate her have proved unsuccessful. Many theories have been advanced, but none that satisfactorily accounts for her disappearance. However mysterious its disappearance, the vanishing Cyclops had a noteworthy effect upon future events. It was the factor directly responsible for the establishment of the National Strategic Stockpile, estimated several years after the incident. During prior debates in Congress, the Cyclops, which had disappeared carrying a cargo of manganese necessary for the production of steel used in weapons and armaments, was cited as a prime example of the necessity for a stockpile, since it illustrated that the United States could not depend on sea lanes for the shipment of strategic materials during international conflicts. Among the more recent peacetime disappearances of warships in the vicinity of the Bermuda Triangle, the case of the Brazilian warship Sao Paulo is particularly striking. The Sao Paulo, destined for scrapping and carrying a caretaker crew of only 8, was in tow by 2 ocean-going tugs southwest of the Azores. It suddenly vanished during the night of October 3rd to 4th, 1951. Because of a rough sea, one of the tugs had released its lines during the night of October 3rd. However, with the dawn of October 4th, and with the sudden return of calm to the sea, the cables on the second tug were noted to be broken or severed from the Sao Paulo and went missing. The resultant search by air and surface craft for the warship was characterized by unusual reports. Unexplained lights had been seen during the night and early morning, and then, on the following day, planes reported dark forms of masses sighted at sea level, which soon disappeared. No signs of the Sao Paulo or of its caretaker crew were ever found. Most commentators on the happenings within the Bermuda Triangle are contented to present them simply as an unsolvable mystery, although several of the most pertinacious researchers have considered that the unexplained disappearances of planes, ships, and people are due to intelligent terrestrial or extraterrestrial agencies, a belief shared, perhaps for want of any other logical explanation, by an increasing number of observers. One theory, as suggested by both Ivan Sanderson and Dr. Manson Valentine, presupposes the actions of intelligent beings based beneath the sea, while another, more popular theory, of which John Spencer, himself a member of the U.S. Air Force for 10 years, is a leading exponent, deduces that extraterrestrials periodically visit the Earth and kidnap or space nap men and equipment to ascertain the stage of our technological advancement. They do this not to see if we have advanced far enough, but to ascertain when we are in danger of advancing too far. Although these theories will again be considered in following pages, it is interesting in view of this suggestion of the possibility of an outer or inner space research laboratory to apply this theory to the disappearance of naval vessels and subsequently of aircraft. The spacing of the dates of disappearances, as well as the shift of disappearances from the naval ships to military planes, as well as the variety of ships and pleasure craft that have disappeared, some carrying only people and others with special cargoes, and again some curious incidents connected with these later losses, are apt to give rise when considered within the framework of this theory to some rather disquieting thoughts. Among commercial ships, one of the first recorded mysteries in this area concerned the Rosalie, a French ship bound for Havana in 1840. The Rosalie did not, however, disappear. The crew and passengers disappeared instead, leaving the ship unmanned, except for one canary. With her sails set and cargo intact. If this was a case of piracy, whoever caused the crew and passengers to vanish seemed to have greater interest in the living people on board than in the ship or its cargo. And if sudden sickness or plague had caused the loss of passengers and crew there, And if sudden sickness or plague had caused the loss of passengers and crew, there would have been some indication of such a situation. As an example of how sudden sickness can cause a ship to become a derelict, there is the case of an incident during the slaving days in the Sargasso Sea, when a schooner sighted a slaver which was sailing erratically. Hailed by the schooner, the slaver's captain asked for help. It seemed that all the slaves and the crew had been stricken by a virulent disease causing blindness. Their call for help was refused by the would-be rescue ship, which departed from the area as quickly as possible, leaving the slaver and its crew and slaves to their doom. On February 26, 1855, the James B. Chester, a three-master, was found by the Marathon sailing aimlessly without crew but with her sails set within the Sargasso Sea. Investigations of the ship's cabin showed the tables and chairs knocked over and in disarray, and personal belongings strewn about. The ship's cargo was intact and the lifeboats in place. There was no evidence of bloodshed or attack. The crew had simply vanished, either by being taken off the ship or by the unlikely possibility of having jumped overboard. It was noted by the Marathon boarders, however, that the papers and compass of the James B. Chester were missing. An almost unbelievable incident happened in 1881 to the American schooner Ellen Austin. While sailing west of the Azores, the schooner encountered an abandoned schooner which, upon being boarded, proved to be ship-shape, with sails furled and with rigging intact. The captain of the Ellen Austin took advantage of this windfall by putting a prize crew aboard the derelict. Before the crew could get it underway, however, a sudden squall caused the two ships to break contact, and 2 days passed before the derelict was sighted again. When it was again boarded, it was discovered that the prize crew had vanished, with no indication of what had happened or where they had gone. But the captain of the Ellen Austin was persistent, and after considerable reticence on the part of his crew for volunteers, finally persuaded a new prize crew to man the mysterious and apparently dangerous ship. Shortly thereafter, another squall came up. Contact was again lost, and neither the vessel nor the second prize crew was ever seen again. A comparison suggests itself here between the abandoned ship and a trap, with even the sudden squalls fitting into the picture if the whole idea were not so outre. Inexplicably, deserted ships in the Triangle area have appeared on numerous other occasions. The German bark Freya, sailing from Manzanillo, Cuba to ports in Chile in October 1902, was found abandoned and listing, with the pages of the ship's calendar torn off until October 4th. At this point in time, a violent earthquake had taken place in Mexico, and it has been predicated that a seismic shock caused the formation of a huge tidal wave which swept away the crew and which swept away the crew of the Freya, or perhaps partially capsized it, and that it subsequently partially righted itself again when the sea was calm. Tales of empty ships found in the Sargasso Sea or neighboring parts of the Atlantic almost invariably mention the Mary Celeste, perhaps the sea's most famous derelict. The incident did not occur on the Sargasso Sea, although the Mary Celeste passed north of it on her way to the spot north of the Azores, where she was found by a British brig, the Di Gratia, in November 1872. The latter vessel, noting the erratic course of the Mary Celeste, hailed her and obtaining no reply, boarded her and subsequently took the Mary Celeste as a prize. The boarding party found her sails were set and her cargo of casks of alcohol was safely stowed in the hold. There were sufficient supplies of food and water, but her complement of 10 persons had disappeared, including the captain, his wife, and baby daughter. Money, pipes, personal possessions, and even the ship's log were left aboard, although the sextant was missing. The main cabin had been boarded up as if someone had wished to create a stronghold to repel attackers. This mystery of the sea has been retold and embroidered, been the subject of court trials and investigations, but still has not been solved. The disappearance of the crew has been variously explained as an attack of pirates, mutiny, and a flight after killing the captain, fear of a cargo about to explode, or sudden knowledge of a contraband and dangerous cargo, an outbreak of plague, or hijacking by supposed friends. Lloyd's of London, who paid the insurance, inclines to the theory that a sudden but short fire of the alcohol cargo may have frightened the crew off the ship and then gone out, given the properties of alcohol for sudden flare-up, burning with a blue flame, and then extinguishing itself. By the time the short flare-up subsided, the crew may have been unable to return to the ship from the lifeboat. Another possible explanation of irrational behavior on the part of the crew might consist in the presence of the ergot in the bread among the ship's stores. Bread tainted with the growth of ergot has affected crews in the past, causing violent madness and death preceded by irrational behavior. A collective insanity brought on by this condition might have induced abandonment of the ship in panic. It may explain some other crew disappearances on ghost ships in various seas of the world. Harold Wilkins in Strange Mysteries of Time and Space, which I assume that's a book, makes a good case for the possibility of the ships having been boarded and taken at sea by persons already known to the ship's complement, with the implication that the crew was disposed of and the empty ship then rediscovered at sea and taken as a prize. In developing this theory, Wilkins points out that the many inconsistencies in the stories of the captain and the crew of the Di Gratia, and the fact that the Di Gratia was moored alongside the Mary Celeste for over a week in New York Harbor and sailed shortly after the ill-fated vessel's departure. After prize proceedings, the refurbished Mary Celeste went to sea again, but soon acquired the reputation of being a jinx ship. Causing misfortune, destruction, and death among those who sailed on her until her final master, Captain Gilman Parker, after supplying over-generous liquor rations to all hands and above all to himself, deliberately, it is said, sailed the Mary Celeste onto a rocky reef near Haiti, and so ended her unlucky career. Other deserted ships with less indications of what happened to their crews include the Carol Deering, which ran aground in its February 1921, on the North Carolina shore, with no indication of what had happened to the crew except that they had abandoned or been taken off the ship while a meal was about to be served. The John and Mary, found deserted in April 1932, 50 miles south of Bermuda. The Gloria Colite, a 125-foot schooner found deserted at sea on February 3rd, 1940. And Rubicon, a Cuban vessel found abandoned except for a hungry dog, off Key Largo, Florida, on October 22nd, 1944. The last entry in her log was for September 26th, and noted that the ship was then in Havana Harbor. Missing lifeboats suggested that the crew had left in a hurry. Ivan Sanderson had observed that in cases of a crew abandoning a ship, it is most unusual for them not to take the ship's mascot or their own individual pets. It is suggested that the crew was forcibly removed, perhaps by entities who wanted only specimens capable of oral communication. Sanderson further comments that it is noteworthy that while cats, dogs, and canaries have been found on ships from which the crews have disappeared, parrots seem to vanish with the humans. Perhaps one might imagine because coherent or incoherent speech is an easy way to recognize the dominant species of the planet Earth. That's an interesting concept, like the parrots are being abducted along with the people because they can speak, and therefore thought of as intelligent by the entities abducting. It's interesting. Crews and passengers have frequently vanished from many smaller boats later found abandoned and adrift, such as the yacht Connemara 4, found 400 miles southwest of Bermuda in September 1955. Empty of passengers and crew, the 60-foot Maple Bank, found drifting north of Bermuda on June 30th, 1969, with no trace of survivors. The Vagabond, a 12-meter owner-operated yacht, found adrift but otherwise shipshape west of the Azores on July 6, 1969, with no signs of its owner, Captain Wallace P. Williams, or its crew. Some boats have disappeared on fairly short trips, such as the case of Al Snyder, a well-known jockey who took several of his friends on his cabin cruiser out of Miami on March 5th, 1948, to go fishing at Sandy Key, and although the yacht was later found, the occupants had disappeared. While certain abandoned small boats found on the high seas after the Cuban Revolution may have had something to do with the activities of escaping Cubans and those pursuing them, one striking disappearance had nothing to do with the Cuban situation. The incident of the witchcraft is an outstanding example of lightning-like sudden disappearance of a small craft not only within sight of its port, but while located at one of the harbor's buoys. Dan Barak, owner of Witchcraft, which incidentally was reputed to be, quote, unmistakable, end quote, had invited a priest, Father Pat Hogan, to see the Christmas lights of Miami from offshore on Christmas Eve, 1967. They proceeded through calm seas to about 1 mile from the shore and stopped to admire the lights from the vicinity of buoy number 7. At this point, Barak made a single unexpected call for help to the Coast Guard, giving his exact position. It took an alerted Coast Guard vessel only 20 minutes to reach buoy number 7, but when it arrived, there was no sign of the Witchcraft. When the search was finally suspended, a Coast Guard spokesman stated, somewhat paradoxically, quote, "We presume they are missing, but not lost at sea," end quote. The list of cargo ships, fishing vessels, and pleasure craft that have vanished with their crews is impressive. Most of the ships have disappeared in good weather and have left no floating wreckage, oil slicks, lifeboats, life jackets, with one notable exception. Or bodies, either in the sea or washed up on neighboring beaches. Like the disappearing planes, the ships sent no SOS messages and reported nothing wrong over their transmitters. These vanishing ships have included the Cotopaxi, a freighter bound for Havana from Charleston in 1925, the Sedufco, a freighter sailing south from Port Newark in 1926, the Stavanger in 1931 with 43 persons on board, which was last located south of Cat Island, and the freighter Anglo-Australian in March 1938 with a crew of 39, which radioed, quote, "all well," end quote, as it passed the Azores on its way west. A spectacular last radio message was received from the Japanese freighter Raifuku Maru, presumably at the time of its disappearance between the Bahamas and Cuba during the winter 1924. The words of the radio message were an unusual call for help. Quote, "Danger like a dagger now. Come quickly. We cannot escape," end quote. Without, however, specifying what the danger was. If the danger was a sudden storm or unexpected waterspout, it would seem normal for a radio officer to give precise information which might later serve to aid rescue operations, rather than to indulge in imaginative comparisons, however striking. Lost ships to the Atlantic during the war years had varied and sufficient reasons, including submarines, mines, bombs, and sabotage, to be lost without trace. But considerably after the war, large ships continued to disappear within the Bermuda Triangle area. The freighter Sandra, bound for the Puerto Cabello from Savannah in June 1950, carrying a cargo of insecticide, passed by St. Augustine, Florida, in good weather and thereafter all contact was lost and never reestablished. It is of interest in the case of the SS Sandra and the others that most of the American ships lost have disappeared in sight of land. Farther south, the Snowboy, a fishing vessel with 40 persons on board, was lost without trace or explanation in 1963 between Kingston, Jamaica, and Northeast Cape. Among the many pleasure boats reported as missing without trace within the area, perhaps an average of one per month, the case of the Revenant, a 46-foot racing yacht which had won prizes in the Newport Bermuda race, which disappeared during a short cruise between Key West and Fort Lauderdale between Christmas and New Year of 1967, a fatal time as we have seen before for disappearances, caused peculiar comment for several reasons. In the first place, the yacht was designed for racing in all weather. Secondly, Captain Conover, the name Revenant was Conover spelled backward. Skipper and owner was an excellent sailor and Commodore for the Cruising Club of America, quote, too good a sailor, end quote, to risk an accident on such a relatively short cruise. In any case, since he was sailing so close to land, some vestige of the yacht would have been found along the shore had it struck a reef. In an attempt to give some logic for the Revenant's disappearance, the then yachting editor of the New York Herald Tribune suggested the possibility that a freighter, known to be in the area at the time, had simply run over the yacht at night, sending it and its crew to the bottom without notice or trace. More than half a century before Conover's disappearance on the Revenant, another well-known sailor, Joshua Slocum, the first man to circumnavigate the world solo, undertook a voyage in 1909 on his 37-foot yawl, the Spray. He was reported to have entered the Triangle area, sailing south from Miami, and shortly afterward he and the Spray disappeared forever. The disappearance of small and medium-sized craft within the Triangle is no doubt due to many cases to weather conditions, especially in the winter, when they become even more unpredictable than usual when the cold Arctic air masses meet the warm air from the tropics. This could have been the case with the schooner Windfall, 56 feet, disappeared off Bermuda in 1962. The 55-foot Evangeline, en route from Miami to the Bahamas, 1962. The 58-foot Enchantress disappeared en route from Charleston to St. Thomas, 1946. And the 36-foot Ketch Dancing Feather disappeared between Nassau and North Carolina, 1964, all of which occurred in winter months, when large waves, whipped up by unexpected storms, could have caused a small craft to founder even before a radio message could be sent. But this, of course, would not explain the disappearance of ships in relatively calm waters, or the several occasions when large freighters or Navy ships have disappeared without a trace. The loss of a 425-foot freighter, the Marine Sulphur Queen, with a crew of 39, on or about February 2nd, 1963, is particularly striking because of the size of the vessel. It was bound for Norfolk, Virginia, from Beaumont, Texas, with a cargo of 15,000 long tons of molten sulfur carried in steel tanks. The weather was good, The ship was last heard of from a point near Dry Tortugas in the Gulf of Mexico, an area in or near the triangle according to its somewhat elastic boundaries. Paradoxically, the vessel was first missed not by its owners but by a brokerage house because of a chain of unusual circumstances. One of the seamen on the Marine Sulphur Queen had been speculating in the stock market, specifically in wheat futures, a pastime that normally requires rather close contact with one's broker, and had placed a buy order before the ship left port. The brokerage house had executed the order and had cabled him confirmation. When no response was received, the brokerage house informed the ship's owners that they could not reach the vessel. The first indication that all was not well, and the incident that initiated the unsuccessful search for the Marine Sulphur Queen, launched by the Coast Guard on February 6th. Its planes and ships ranged from the Virginia Capes to the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico. Although the search was discontinued on February 15th, 5 days later, the Navy reported finding a life jacket from the Marine Sulphur Queen 15 miles out at sea, south of Key West. This initiated a new hunt, which found only another life jacket. A subsequent investigation dealt with a wide range of possibilities: explosion of the sulfur, capsizing, hitting a mine, or even capture and confiscation by Cubans or Cuban sympathizers. A Marine Board of Investigation noted that the Marine Sulphur Queen had, quote, disappeared at sea without the transmission of a radio distress message, end quote, but offered neither solution nor theory concerning this disaster. Stories about the Bermuda Triangle were once more revived when the atomic submarine USS Scorpion, carrying a crew of 99, failed to return to its home port in Norfolk, Virginia on May 28, 1968. It had sent its last routine message back to its base on May 21st from 250 miles west of the Azores. On June 5th, it was presumed lost, but several months later, a naval oceanographic research ship located some wreckage 460 miles south of the Azores at a depth of more than 10,000 feet. By the way, when I'm struggling with these words, they're hyphenated and continue on the next page, so I mispronounce them sometimes because of that, so my apologies. Let's continue. As underwater photographs seem to have established the identity of the Scorpion, it cannot be said to have vanished, although the reason for its loss on the edge of the Sargasso Sea cannot be ascertained. If there is, as some investigators of the Bermuda Triangle phenomenon have suggested, an intelligence-directed reason behind many of the disappearances or near disappearances, the loss of survival of several atomic submarines in the western Atlantic suggests wider possibilities than equipment malfunction. If the area of disappearing ships is projected into the Gulf of Mexico, as John Spencer suggests, a 1966 disappearance of a vessel there would also be considered, especially in view of the later to-be-discussed escape from whatever menace ships and planes are facing in this area. It concerns the 67-foot tugboat Southern Cities, which left Freeport, Texas, on October 29, 1966, with a 210-foot barge in tow. When the Southern Cities did not make its daily report by radio, an air search was initiated which located the barge, complete with its cargo of chemicals undisturbed, with its tow line intact up to its connection chain. but no tugboat or tugboat crew. An excerpt from the report of the Maritime Board of Inquiry of the Coast Guard might be applied to any or all of the numerous planes and ships that have disappeared. Quote, the failure of the vessel to transmit a distress message appears to justify the conclusion that the loss of the vessel may have occurred so rapidly as to preclude the transmission of such a message. More recent disappearances include the Ithaca Island in November 1968, carrying a cargo of grain from Norfolk to Manchester. The Milton Itrides in April 1970, en route from New Orleans to Cape Town with a cargo of vegetable oils and caustic soda. The Anita, a large cargo ship, 20,000 tons, with a crew of 32, which sailed from Newport News in March 1973 with a cargo of coal for Germany and was not heard from again. After a characteristically thorough investigation, definitely establishing that the Anita had inexplicably disappeared, Lloyd's of London paid $3 million insurance to the owners of the Anita. The Anita's sister ship, the Norse Variant, which left port within 2 hours before her, radioed that she was sinking 150 miles south of Cape May. It was thought at first that all crew members were lost, but one survivor saved himself by clinging to a wooden hatch. He reported that the sinking occurred within minutes. An extremely violent wind suddenly rose, blowing movable objects from the decks. Sudden heavy seas swamped the ship, filling the holds and sinking the ship within 5 minutes. Considering the diversity of the cargoes of the many merchant ships that have vanished, there seems to be no underlying theme suggesting a connection between the cargo and the disappearance, such as piracy, danger of explosives, mutiny, and the like. They seem to be random disappearances, but concentrated within the same area. In commenting on the disappearance of ships and planes within the Bermuda Triangle, an information officer of the USS 3rd Naval District has expressed a widely held, although certainly unofficial, professional opinion. Quote, it's been a real mystery. Nobody in the Navy sneers at this thing. We've always known there's something strange about this Bermuda Triangle, but nobody has ever found out what it is. There doesn't seem to be any physical or logical reason. It's almost as if these ships had been suddenly covered by some sort of electromagnetic camouflage net. End quote. With only a few exceptions, almost all of the incidents concerned with planes and ships have taken place in or in the vicinity of the Sargasso Sea and the coastal waters which border it. Ivan Sanderson, while warning about concentrating area research on any glaring incident, comments on the aggravating aspects of the fact that the position of the Sargasso Sea just about coincides with the fact that, quote, most of the disappearances of the planes and most of the ships of old had occurred in this mysterious lozenge-shaped area. It would seem to be an ironic coincidence that this area, feared from ancient times and legends that existed long before it was officially discovered, and later feared for hundreds of years as a sea of doom, should conserve its sinister aura and much of its mystery right into the space age, uniting in wonder individuals who might be termed the opposite ends of an exploration spectrum, Columbus and the astronauts of Apollo 12. Columbus, on board the Santa Maria, was the first observer to have on record that, or was the first observer we have on record to notice the unexplained glowing of the area. The luminous white water of the Bahamas, near the western edges of the Sargasso Sea, which he saw on his voyage on October 11th, 1492, 2 hours after sunset, while the astronauts noted these same luminous streaks or flumes in the water as the last lights visible to them from the Earth. This phenomenon has been variously supposed to be the marl stirred up by bonefish, banks of fish, or other organic matter. Whatever its origin, still unexplained, this strange light is visible from the surface and especially noticeable from the air. Columbus's first voyage was the occasion for other mysterious incidents which even today are still a source of comment and wonder in the Triangle area. On September 15th, 1492, while within the western part of the Sargasso Sea, he and his increasingly nervous crew observed a huge bolt of fire shoot across the heavens and fall or appear or disappear into the ocean. Some days later, members of his crew were again filled with dread by an inexplicable disturbance affecting the ship's compass. An odd forecast on the eve of the discovery of the New World, of the electromagnetic disturbances still affecting air and sea navigation within the Triangle. Still another of the several mysteries connected with the Sargasso Sea, and one that has intrigued ancient as well as modern observers, concerns the spawning of eels. Aristotle, 384 to 322 BC, was the first naturalist of antiquity reported to have brought up the puzzling question of the breeding grounds of the European eels, which were, of course, the only eels he knew about. The eels were known to leave their ponds, lakes, streams, and small rivers and swim down the large rivers that empty into the sea. This was all that was known about the breeding grounds of the eels until about 2,500 years later, when a Danish scientist, Dr. Johann Schmidt, discovered where the eels had been going on their journeys during all the intervening centuries since the question was first raised. The adult European eels follow the waterways that empty into the Atlantic. There they unite and swim in a great shoal, progressing slowly for about 4 months, accompanied by flights of feeding gulls and packs of sharks, until they reach the point in the Sargasso Sea where they stop and spawn at a considerable depth. There the adults die, and the newly born eels start their long trip back, borne by the Gulf Stream, on a return trip to Europe, which takes about 2 years to accomplish. The behavior of eels from the American continent follows the same pattern in reverse. These eels swim eastward and meet the European eels in the depth of the Sargasso Sea, and the young eels return to their ancestral homes in the Americas. This remarkable behavior of eels and their inherited nostophilia, memories of an ancestral home or breeding place, has given rise to some extremely interesting theories, including the one that their original breeding ground was in a great river of a former continent, which once existed in the Atlantic, in the vicinity of the Sargasso Sea, and that the eels still seek out their original spawning grounds at the site of the vanished river, which once flowed through a continent now thousands of feet under the sea. It has even been suggested that the weeds of the Sargasso Sea are adapted underwater, growing remnants of the vegetation of the former Atlantic continent, which sank, according to historic legend, with great rapidity, taking with it all its luxuriant forests and greenery. But of the several mysteries of the Sargasso Sea and its borders, that of the lost ships and planes and their possible connection with other phenomenon is the most intriguing, especially since it concerns the area so widely traveled every day by so many sea and aircraft. It may be, of course, that there is a logical explanation for every one of these disappearances, and that terms like atmospheric aberrations, holes in the sky, disintegration through unexplained turbulence, sky traps, a gravity sink, and implications that aircraft and large and small ships have been captured and removed by unknown agencies simply represent attempts to explain the unexplainable. There is, however, another element to the mystery, a rather recent and unexpected one. In the many past disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle, there have been not only no survivors, but not a single body among the many victims has been recovered. However, within recent years, with the spread of the Bermuda Triangle legend, certain pilots and seamen are beginning to lose their understandable reticence to discuss the unusual and to tell of escapes that they personally have had from forces operating within the Bermuda Triangle. A consideration of some of these accounts indicates a possible pattern which may explain how, if not why, some of these losses have occurred. And that is the end of chapter 3. So, that is all for today. Next week we will be reading chapter 4, titled Some Who Escaped. And, I may start adding the chapter titles if it can fit on the titles here. But, yes, I think this is very interesting, considering there are captain logs of ships and flight logs of planes, and that all of that record keeping is officialized, going back hundreds, if not thousands of years. And here we have just a handful of the very unusual accounts that have happened in this area of the world. So, thanks for being here with me today. I really hope that this consistency will bring in more live viewers. I will be here every Thursday at 4:30 reading from this book. There will be a new series that I'm starting on Saturday at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. We'll be reading from Flickering Empire, and the general topic of that deep dive is 1900s Chicago film industry. And as I move along here with this Bermuda Triangle deep dive, I will be pulling from different things. I think you'll start to see that element in my Coral Castle series on Tuesdays, since we're getting to the end of the pamphlets. If I do any further shows after that, which I probably will, it will be my personal collections of different things I've found, and not just direct reading from a book, but I know you all enjoy the reading, so I will continue to do that. And if you have any questions, if you have any suggestions, please leave a comment and let me know, or email me directly. You can find my email on my website in the description here. And please, if you haven't already, like the video, share it around, subscribe and hit the bell notification icon. Apparently all of those things factor into reachability. So even though I have the freedom to speak for the most part on YouTube, I do not have freedom of reach. And the same thing is happening on X. So there's not much else I can do. I have 2,051 subscribers, and it's literally telling me 2 people are watching right now. So why would I do this for 2 people? I don't know. It sounds kind of wild, doesn't it? And why only 2 people watch out of 2,000 subscribers? I've brought this up before, but I just thought it was interesting enough to say again. Even though I've been doing this consistently since the beginning of the year, there's still not an established viewer base. So, who knows? Maybe I am permanently shadow banned on YouTube through this channel, through the topics that I've covered in the past, including board meeting videos. So am I politically targeted? I don't know. But otherwise, I'll still be here. This is my main account. I try to keep up on BitChute, Rumble, sometimes TikTok. I need to get the Instagram updated again, although that's mostly Reels. But for the most part, this is going to be it for today. I'm glad we kept it under an hour and 30 minutes. So we'll just continue rolling on. Next week, we'll be on Chapter 4 of the Bermuda Triangle book by Charles Berlitz. And until the next one, I hope to see you all on Saturday and again on Tuesday of next week. And of course, next Thursday, right here, covering the Bermuda Triangle. So, take care, everyone. And until the next one, class dismissed.